2 years ago, I released a video titled, "It's Impossible to Live as a Crunchyroll Translator." In it, I talked about the persistence of the streaming service's abysmally low rates for translators that all started with a creep who drummed up business by trying to pay them as little as possible. The $80 per episode number stuck around for an unreasonably long time, with some still being paid that much right towards the end of the 2010s. Since that video's release, I've heard from a lot of people discussing their issues with translation pay in different countries and at different companies. The manga company Amimaru was a huge culprit. Not only were they paying both their typesetters and translators roughly $1 a page, but a year later they were found to be trialing machine translations, which could only make their already awkward releases even worse. Ultimately, it's become clear that these localization companies will always pay as little as they can get away with. While I believe things have changed at Crunchyroll somewhat, it's only due to the efforts of collective pressure both internally and externally, and even then they still refuse to move up to what should be industry standard rates, or even the amounts paid by their less affluent competitors. When it was announced that Funimation would be acquiring Crunchyroll for over $1 billion, my first thought was, hey, Funimation pays their translators better, so that must mean that all the Crunchyroll translators will be getting a big raise. Good for them. It was only after speaking to translators later on that I realised how utterly naive that was. Even when more money is coming in, the golden rule stays the same. Pay as little as you possibly can. When Funimation bought Crunchyroll, they bought their practices as well. Funimation translators who were being paid more than their new colleagues were either laid off or given the option to accept a pay cut that, depending on the person, could be drastic. A reminder, this is at a company that Sony valued at over $1 billion. But translators are the ones that made up that value. Lose all the executives and you still have quality subtitled anime. Lose all the translators and you've got nothing. It became clear not long after the acquisition that to Funimation, the most valuable part of Crunchyroll was its name, not necessarily its team. Despite a series of mishaps, including the mishandling of their line of original content, the service has gained 5 million paying subscribers and 120 million users in total. So the merger ended up being less of a merge and more of a total rebranding. Funimation's brand would become Crunchyroll Dubs, and anytime you watched a show on their existing platform, it would tell you to go away and subscribe to Crunchyroll instead. Behind the scenes, a bunch of roles shifted about, with Crunchyroll staff across a number of roles leaving, their spots left either vacant or filled with Funimation or Sony employees. Basically, it's still called Crunchyroll, but it's Funimation's COO running the show. And despite fans fearing a monopoly, the new Crunchyroll then had the uphill battle of convincing everyone that this merger was a popular idea. It was announced under the title of, quote, Funimation Global Group to acquire Crunchyroll, fans win. And that fans win part has been seen all over the place in an effort to convince us, the fans, that hey, we won. They even went so far as to pay popular anime influencers, not to promote anything in particular, but just to say that the acquisition was a good idea.
Crunchyroll and Funimation just took anime to the next level.
This means all of your favourite anime in one place.
It's a step in the right direction, and a big win for anime fans.
What will you be watching on Crunchyroll?
#ad.
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 But it's not just fans, they've also got to convince production companies in Japan that users are happy with this merger. With big pushes from Netflix and now Disney, the industry still wants anime licensors to have to fight over their shows. But even if the industry can get its money, a monopoly still isn't great for anyone that's not a Sony executive. As much as they say that we, the fans, quote, win, streaming services are often quick to exploit that. As Netflix has gotten bigger, their subscription fees increased as well, and it didn't take long for Crunchyroll to get rid of their option to watch new anime with ads for free. Back when I was in high school, that was how I got into seasonal anime in the first place. Even if it's cool to get stuff like Deca-Dence now on Crunchyroll, they wouldn't be merging these services if they didn't think they could get more money out of us.
いらっしゃい、夏目ちゃん。また値段上がりました。
It is worse for translators though. During a panel at Crunchyroll Expo 2020, translator Adam Linson-Meyer insisted that it was important for anime translators to pick up jobs across the industry, instead of just at one company. His comments are prescient. His logic was that when you're stuck with a single client, you're always going to be subject to shakeups within the industry, and decisions from the very top can negatively affect your income. But the acquisition has made that much more difficult. Translators who worked for both Funimation and Crunchyroll are now left with just Crunchyroll and a drop in their income. One of the most annoying comments I received on my last video, and honestly one of the most annoying things you can say about any labour issue, is why don't they just quit? To begin with, a lot of people do, but also corporate consolidation really limits your options. Crunchyroll now scoops up the vast majority of seasonal licenses. It's actually been a shining ray of hope to see HIDIVE doing so well in this current season. Your boy Kongbing and the Executioner and Her Way of Life alone are worth the price of admission. It was acquired by AMC Networks earlier in the year, and despite being a fraction of the size of Crunchyroll and Sony, they offer better deals to their translation staff. If anyone in the Japanese anime industry is watching this, the message to come away with is license your shows out to HIDIVE. A monopoly doesn't help anyone. In my last video, I did a bit of maths to figure out what somebody outside of the anime industry would charge to translate an episode, and I got averages between $400 and $500. This time, I decided to just ask translators, hey, what do you think would be a fair rate? And believe it or not, I received answers between $400 and $500. What anime translators are asking for isn't absurd, it's normal. Anime subtitles are of a similar high quality to other audiovisual media, consistently nailing character voice, natural dialogue, and timing. And so, especially with anime streaming being such a profitable business, you'd expect that they could shell out the same kind of cash. But one thing that's been consistently made clear to me across the years is that while translators obviously do care about being paid a fair rate, they also care a lot about having the tools and time to do their job properly. Getting the episode scripts and having the time to go over them to deliver something that's just as fun in English as it is in Japanese is essential. That show I mentioned just before, your boy Kongbing on HIDIVE, the 6th episode of that blew people away. Not just because most of the episode is rap battles, but also because of the subtitles from translator Jake Young that brought the fun and rhythm of the Japanese script to English speakers. It's not easy. The rhyming schemes, the existing English text that needs to be worked around, the cultural references. Translating this episode not only involved doing a bunch of research on how to write rap rhyming schemes, but also involved being able to ask for help and advice. And according to Jake, he was provided with the script and video, quote, far in advance, something that he regarded as instrumental in being able to do a good job with it. Funimation likewise offered more time and guaranteed more resources than their former competitor. It is more difficult to translate at Crunchyroll, which honestly is ridiculous. Why is it that the largest vendor is having the hardest time getting assets to their localization staff early? This is a company that doesn't just license anime, but co-produces it as well. If the translator needs information from the production team in Japan quickly, then that should be facilitated, because that's how anime fans outside of Japan experience their work, and everyone in this business is striving for accuracy. As Crunchyroll translator Shiram Gurunathan puts it, translation is 20% actual translating and 80% research. I've talked to people who have gone through some bizarrely specific rabbit holes, studying engineering for a mecha novel, Buddhism for a reverse isekai. This work takes time, and with time should also come money.
あんたとは仲良くやっていきたいんだからさ。この先もずっと。
Call me a socialist, but I believe that with the overseas anime industry making so much money, localization teams, including translators, editors, timers, they should all be entitled to paychecks that reflect the amount of money they bring in. Today, it's overseas licensing that makes up most of the revenue that the anime industry in Japan earns. And let's not forget, Sony valued Crunchyroll at just over $1 billion. There are a lot of changes that could be made. The introduction of rush fees, where if you're expected to translate an episode in a shorter than usual time, you should be compensated extra for that. There should also be more options for employment. Most anime translators work freelance, but if a translator is working so many hours for your company that they might as well be a full-time employee with benefits, make them a full-time employee with benefits. Clearly they're worth it. This was particularly frustrating during the early days of COVID, when the anime industry faced a load of delays. And while that was disappointing for fans, it was worse for translators who were relying on working on a certain amount of shows each season to make rent. Many had to search for work outside of anime, or even outside of translation. So even while Crunchyroll faced its largest growth ever during the pandemic, they weren't able to offer any stability to their most essential workers. It's a depressingly familiar story across many industries. Honestly, some of these are talking points that I've stolen wholesale from the United Workers of Seven Seas, a union formed by the employees of the popular manga publisher. And one of the things that stood out to me the most was how many of their demands weren't just for themselves. These are employees of the company who are speaking out for better conditions for their freelance letterers, translators, and designers who could face repercussions for speaking out themselves. It may not work out for everyone. Unions aren't a quick fix, and it'll be harder to make changes on behalf of those outside of the bargaining employees. But collective pressure, both internally and externally, is always going to be the best way to enact change. And speaking of which, it's also worth talking about a different kind of localization worker.
All I want to do is stay on your good side, for as long as that may be.
Much like with subtitle translators, the issues in pay for voice actors has been a thing long before the merger. But with the backing of Sony and $1 billion plus buyout, the excuses of, quote, "oh, but anime is still niche," have become even more ridiculous than they already were. One of the big examples lately has been the cast of the feature film Jujutsu Kaisen 0, the #2 film at the box office during its opening weekend, only getting paid somewhere between $150 and $600 for their performances. I'll let you do the maths on how that compares to actors who work on literally anything else that's not anime. Even if you don't watch anime dubs yourself, a massive amount of people do, and the number of anime dubs has been increasing year after year. In 2014, Funimation launched their Simuldub brand, which had English dubbed episodes launching episode to episode a couple of weeks following the Japanese and subtitled releases, keeping all fans up to date. But with the rising popularity of anime, the amount that English voice actors have been paid has remained depressingly low. Rates between $35 and $75 per hour may seem like a lot, but that has to take into account the fact that most of the time in between jobs is spent trying to get jobs. The rates must be higher, and Coda, the coalition of dubbing actors, has made that clear. Incredibly clear, in fact. They have an entire page dedicated to industry standards, not just in the way of pay, but also other important factors, like minimum 2-hour bookings, that give actors a guaranteed income for their sessions. A lot of these can be guaranteed through a union contract, like Netflix achieved in 2019, which unionized all of their programming. And that is an option for the new Crunchyroll, and what many are campaigning for. But ultimately, it does just come down to the benefits themselves, and recognizing that there are improvements that need to be made to retain talent. For instance, vocally stressful performances should be acknowledged and compensated, with frequent breaks, shorter sessions, and hazard pay. And especially now during COVID, there needs to be more consideration for safety. Early in the pandemic, Funimation opened up remote recording. It not only made things safer for both immunocompromised voice actors and those that lived with other immunocompromised people, but it also opened up anime dubbing to a much larger cast of actors, not only across America, but across the world.
Those incorrigible heroes don't seem to care who they hurt. It really is a terrible shame. Are you all right over there, my friend?
It hasn't been all peachy, of course. Voice actors had to set up studio spaces at home on their own dime, and a lot of the technical side of things fell onto their shoulders. Audio engineering work would also be required to make all of those different recording environments fit together. But even so, It worked for some people and should have been kept as an option. Unfortunately, the new Crunchyroll recently ordered that all of their in-house dubs be brought back in person in their Texas studio, a place that a lot of people don't want to be moving to right now for a lot of reasons. Even their one step forward ended up being pushed back, and that's the issue. Much like with subtitling, Crunchyroll and Sony have become a choke point. They license most of the shows, and so if you want to work in the anime space, they're going to be your best bet for actually getting jobs.
Took a while to make my point tonight, but all I was saying was you better make things right.
As it stands, this is a company that is making more money than ever before, but is still paying freelance localization staff like they're a super niche fan company. These issues are complex, and there may be no simple fix, as different people do want different things. But that's the point. Localization staff are telling them exactly what they need. There's a whole conversation, a back and forth. Crunchyroll just doesn't want to take part. On its most basic level, the rates need to improve, but there are other actionable changes across the localization industry that includes both benefits and ways to make the work more productive. Sony bought Crunchyroll as a brand, a streaming service, a cute mascot with orange hair that promotes anime throughout the world. But if you look past the balance sheets, you see something that should really be obvious. The core service that Crunchyroll provides is localization. They're just not paid in any way that reflects that. Could you imagine if animators who work on anime were paid that badly? Okay, yeah, the whole industry kinda sucks. As fans, the whole thing can feel futile, and I accept that a lot of this video is made up of wishful thinking. But Crunchyroll refuses to respond to any of this. They, quote, don't discuss compensation specifics for their full-time staff or contractors. But I think it's worth talking openly and loudly, not just to bully a large corporation, which is always fun, but also to let future translators and voice actors know that their skill sets are worth much, much more than this.
それでは皆さん、有益な一日を。
Thanks for watching The Canipa Effect. The work of localization teams is massively misunderstood among fans, and in a way that can kind of make sense. The point of the job is to create an understanding. If fans could recognize every decision being made, they'd be doing the job themselves. That's not to say that mistakes and bad hires don't happen, but as it stands, many of these misunderstandings and queries take the form of harassment and spite, and is basically just doing these short-changing corporations work for them. They are looking for excuses to devalue their workers. Try not to give it to them. But before I go, I'd like to thank these incredible people for supporting the channel. In particular, I'd like to thank Austin Hardwick, Chris Boylan, Dedameat, Eddie Laheka, Edwin Shale, Faux Wizard, Frizzy Canadian, Frogkun, Fujay, Jacob Bosley, JR Pictures, Mike Tamborelli, My Own Mother, Nolan Soga, Rylan Taylor, Toma Rahman, and Tiago Nascimento. If you want more videos like this, or perhaps a bit more optimistic, then please visit patreon.com/thecanipaeffect.